I'm Parveen. I have no commercial interests. Nobody ever comes to me with any either. Like, not even whoever makes all the PPIs I prescribe, they don't even give me a hint, you know? There's nothing in here that's copyrighted. And we'll, as part of what we're going to cover, talk about ways to get audio material that's not copyrighted. Incidentally, on the middle of the tables, there's a two-sided handout for you to take. It has useful websites to get free music clips and sound effects. And on the other side, it has some information about the how to use an equalizer, which we'll cover, to change the sound of your voice in different ways. So I just want to introduce the idea of medical podcasting, and then I want to get to a practical demonstration, which will hopefully be the most useful thing, and just show you that you could go back to your hotel room and, using probably just the things in your pocket, have an uploadable podcast. We want to gain familiarity with medical podcasting, and we're going to use something called Surgery 101, which is now a 10-year-old podcast that I started when I was a resident. That keeps going strong under Dr. Jonathan White up at the U of A. We're going to do a 5-step plan for podcast creation and then do the practical demo. And what I really want you to get out of this is that it's an effective educational tool. It certainly seems to be. It seems to be good for all levels of the medical education life cycle. And just getting started is the hardest part. The hardest is in quotation marks, because it is actually not so hard. In terms of, you already have most of the knowledge and skills you need to do it. It's just like a lot of things, inertia. Once you get going and once you get rolling, it's not so bad. All the technical stuff is quite easy with modern equipment, and you can add a lot of complexity, and you might find that's a pretty satisfying thing and a neat thing, but you really don't need it. You just add that as you go, and then just distribute it freely for your best results. I think that there's a lot of reasons why certain things might be kept on, say, university servers, but in terms of what we did with Surgery 101, and I'll get to that, is we threw it out on iTunes and just had it publicly available, and it went great. Okay. So this is a time lapse of me putting together a podcast, but now is maybe just a good time to talk about things. So I'm Parveen. I'm a general surgeon at the Chinook Regional Hospital. I trained at the U of A, and that's where I got started in podcasting, and I helped start Surgery 101. Let's just, podcast, we all know what this is, but basically we're distributing these media files that automatically or via subscription, and there's various apps you can use. And back when I started this, there were no smartphones. There were Palm Pilots and digital media, portable digital media devices and stuff. And certainly the smartphone revolution has changed all of this. They're quite ubiquitous. And of course, you can find these on any topic that you can imagine. I did discover that there's tons of these in the university world that are just recordings of lectures. But also, like, the major journals tend to put out summaries of their content. Now, I went for a look around for rural medicine podcasts, and I actually didn't find too many. There's this really rural surgery that Brett Batchelor does, and he continues to do. He basically seems to pick topics and then just do like a review of them, like an evidence-based review. I think he sends them to queries to the librarian, I think at UBC. But the idea is that he's trying to do evidence-based reviews from the point of view, he's a family doctor who did additional surgical training. Broom Docs by someone named Casey Parker, who's a GP in Broome, Australia. It's a different perspective from the other end of the world. There was this rural health from Latrobe, Australia, but when I last checked, they hadn't updated since 2013. And then just this year, as I was updating my slides, there's this newer one, Rural Emergency Medicine, from Carl Richards in Delta, Colorado. And I wanted to find out more, but what's weird is when I click on their website link, it's just lots of weird pop-ups. So I don't know who his website host is. Like if you go on iTunes or whatever, there is a podcast happening, But I was curious about him, and as I tried to find out more, a lot of very annoying pop-ups happened. So I don't know. But does anyone know any other like specifically rural medicine podcast? Because it really feels like an unexploited niche.
It is, but rural dogs are too busy.
Right. We'll get to that.
I know.
Right. Yeah.
I thought I'd give you that opening.
Right. Okay, so why should you care? Because this is a way, if you have learners, you can be available to them whenever they are ready to receive the learning. If you are someone who teaches in a formal setting, you can distribute your didactic material for prior review. You can give them your lecture beforehand so that when they show up for whenever they're going to sit down in the classroom with you, then we're going to discuss it. We're not going to do what I'm doing right now, which is just talk at you. Reaching an audience outside the profession, we know for certain with the Surgery 101 podcasts that a lot of people who are not doctors or nurses or even in sciences were listening to them. I've had patients who showed up for their for biliary colic consult who said, yeah, I have a pretty good idea about it because I listened to your podcast. This can be part of your personal learning or your CME, like the work you do as you put it together, and you just have to do your short little thing and reflect, okay, this is what I learned. That's CME. And just, at I guess a more philosophical standpoint, it gives you a chance to focus and think about, well, what's actually important, because attention spans are not infinite. Now, I started podcasting because I used to know a fair amount about computers when computers showed you this when they turned them on, okay? And then, life happens, and then university, biochemistry, medicine, surgery, I basically was no longer familiar with a lot of what at the time was called Web 2.0, like the way the internet was evolving, and podcasts were part of it. So I spoke with Dr. Jonathan White, who's still at the University of Alberta, and we decided that I'd do a little research project. And we just decided, okay, let's call this Surgery 101, and let's just make some focused audio podcasts intended for our clerkship students. And we just informed them about it at the outset of the rotation. They could use it or not use it. And then after they did their exam, they were given a survey, just so we could collect some data about what they were doing. And 84% of students downloaded the podcast during the rotation. And this is, again, at a time when it was not quite so easy to download podcasts. I mean, it wasn't hard, but it's 10 years ago, right? Everyone wasn't walking around with a smartphone. Okay, so this is the first episode.
If it hasn't happened already, sometime soon you will be faced with this very common scenario. It's another night on call and your pager's going off, yet again. It's another consult from the emergency department. They have a young man with 24 hours of abdominal pain that's been intensifying. The emergency physician is wondering if it's appendicitis. As you make your way down to see the patient, what sorts of things should be going through your mind? In this podcast, we'll discuss acute appendicitis, how it presents, how to diagnose it, and the options for treatment. Welcome to Surgery 101.
So that was our format, where there'd be an intro and I'd say what we're going to talk about. Listening to that now, I can hear all kinds of audio problems in it, which at the time I didn't really think about. And if I were to play it longer, or you were to hear some other of the ones that we've done, you'd hear issues with the technical part of it. Okay, and I mention that because none of that prevented this from becoming a really popular podcast. People did comment to us, well, sometimes the volume of the music is going up and down, or, can you stop mumbling, or something like that. But they kept downloading them. 17,000 downloads in the first 6 months. There are not that many medical students rotating through surgery in a 6-month period. So people from outside, because we just threw it up on iTunes, were discovering it, and they wanted it. And they just said, when are you going to make more? And then some people at the residency level wanted them. So some of our data was interesting. This slide is mostly just to show you that this is when we start uploading. This is the period of time I was uploading new episodes, because our intent was just to do those first few. And then I stopped, and I actually went off, and I was into my chief year of general surgery, and I vanished from the face of the earth. But about 1,000 downloads a month just kept on happening. So there's no new content. That's 1,000 people coming by and downloading another one, or 1,000 download incidents. So one person perhaps did many. But the point is that they wanted it. And when we were gathering data from the medical students, what was interesting about it is that we had sort of imagined that they'd be using these while they were doing other stuff. But the majority of the time, they were sitting down and listening to them while they are studying. So they were intending to use them to study. It was not a distraction while they cleaned the house or something like that. And yeah, mostly at home. Sometimes they listen to it on the road. And this here, just to point out that, when we gave them a Likert scale about how useful is this, they all found it useful. The one thing that no one's interested in is personal experiences, lifestyle issues or personal experiences in surgical careers. Fine. So anyway, like I said, I went on to my chief year and I vanished, and Jonathan White kept going. And now it's like a phenomenon. He's brought in people from all kinds of different faculties. They are exploring lots of different formats. It's become quite amazing. The point of this is, I had no idea what I was doing. I just did it. And then Dr. White and I sat down and said, okay, this sounds good, that sounds good, let's do it this way. And then we just ran with it. So there's nothing at all stopping you from making something like that. A lot of it is just getting started. At one point in time, we would talk about the idea of vodcasts, but nowadays you just start a YouTube channel. And I'm going to maybe try to convince you that that's not the way to start anything, because it's just, there's more technical stuff involved, and that's just one more barrier to getting started. Okay, so that is why I think this is something important to talk about. So this is going to be our podcasting plan. We're going to set an objective, we're going to write a script, we're going to make a recording, edit the file. And then we're not going to do this right now, but the last thing you do is you post it. When you're going to set your objectives, let's say if you're formally teaching students, if there are existing objectives, just use those. That's the easiest thing to do. So if medical students are coming through psychiatry and you have something right there about anxiety disorders, just hit those points, right? That's what they've been asked to know. That's what they want to know. So let them know it, right? And that'll be a really easy way to get started. And there's very few barriers that way. Try to keep it simple, and remember that it is not meant to replace anything else. It should be part of this environment where clinical exposure should always be it should be the primary thing. It should be where they integrate things and where they acquire knowledge from you and from the patients. But as part of the other stuff, I think podcasts are right up there. When we first started doing this, somebody sort of asked like a pointy stick question and said, so what evidence do you have that the podcasts are effective? And I said, well, look, what evidence do I have that textbooks are effective? But you had me buy a different textbook for every friggin' rotation. We don't have, these are tools that are available. And again, in the intervening 10 years, I think it's pretty obvious that a podcast is a way of getting to a learner where they're at and when they want to be engaged with your subject. Scripting and editing. The podcast people listen to, do they seem scripted when you listen to them, or do they sound like it's extemporaneous? A little bit 50-50, yeah. I know that I'm going to advocate scripting. My wife, she listens to a lot of stuff about learning disorders and language learning and that sort of stuff. And one of her favorites is somebody who just, I think she just uses her phone and starts talking. And she just says, look, I'm going to start talking about this now. and she talks about it for half an hour, and that works for her, and she can do it. But I think, at least in terms of, especially when you're getting started, scripting is necessary, because if your intent is to make this into like a micro-teaching opportunity, you need to sort of get to your core message, relay it, reinforce it. I put time as limited with that little asterisk. I mean, really, time is not limited. With a podcast, you could make it as long as you like, but I think that's actually that's a trap, right? Even when people are talking about a particularly interesting thing on a podcast, if they go on and on, it's not that useful, because I know that they don't have a plan in terms of what they're trying to convey and have a package to convey it. They might as well be talking about like sports or something, which is something that never ends. And so you just keep on talking about it, and I suppose it's interesting, but it's not really education. When you write your script, it's a good idea to speak it, and just make sure it sounds right. In terms of things I think are useful, introduction, information, review. I think memory aids like the rule of twos for Meckel's diverticulum, the 20 to 30% rule for gallstones, those sorts of things that we put in there. Talk about proportions as opposed to lists, really nitty-gritty numeric data, long anecdotes, sort of things. Again, just keeping in mind the timeline that you have to convey your information. When you record, use the best microphone you can afford is usually the advice people give you. I have to say that the built-in mics on the computers and the phones, if you know how to do a little bit of audio engineering, which is, the changing the equalizer and stuff, it can come out sounding pretty good. But it's never hurts to have an external microphone. Try to be somewhere quiet. I listened to one podcast. The guy must live near a police station or a fire hall, because he does an excellent job. He actually has a professional sound engineer that edits things, but every now and then you'll hear like the sirens in the background, and I'll be listening in my car. So then I'm looking around because I'm looking for the fire truck. A clear tone of voice, of course. I mean, that's helpful. Not everybody has the professional narrator's voice, but I mumble, and I try not to mumble if I'm recording something. And then what are you going to record on? We'll talk a little bit about GarageBand and Audacity. Right now, I think Audacity is better to use. GarageBand used to actually have a dedicated podcast setting that was pretty easy, but it's gone now. I don't know why. Then when we edit it, we're going to take out any of our bloopers. You can add music and audio cues. We'll talk about that. Figure out our length, save our final cut, and then just keep in mind that we want to keep it as simple as possible. You can really spend a lot of time trying to get it perfect, especially once you know to listen for certain things. You'll keep hearing them, and even you'll hear them on professionally produced podcasts. Little things, like the plosive sounds or background hiss or mouth noises and stuff. Just don't get caught up in that, because you won't get rid of it, and it'll be one more barrier. Like I said, I didn't do a great job in the first 10. I just sort of did whatever I could, and people downloaded them. And then when you disseminate, this is one of these things. I have a list on the handout. There's lots of different hosts, and lots of them have a free option, which is maybe not a bad way of getting started. Usually the free option will limit you in terms of length or in terms of total storage space, like all your back catalog, whether or not they'll store it for you. You might want to consider whether you're going to make an institutional production or a private production. This is something that Dr. White and I, when we started Surgery 101, we made a point of not ever in any way mentioning the University of Alberta. And we did that just because we didn't want anyone to come along and say yes or no to us at the time. We just sort of say, well, this is the thing we're doing. And we at no point mentioned that we're affiliated with the university. And then once it was successful, the university came along and said, hey, that's a pretty nice podcast. And now it's under the auspices of the U of A. But we just started, we didn't go to them and say, well, what do you think of this for our surgery program? We just did it. And then updates, I just put that there because if you are hoping to grow something, you do need to update it fairly regularly. Like people, if you upload on Wednesdays, there are actually, believe it or not, going to be people on Thursday morning wondering where the podcast is because they really like listening to it, and they thought that every Wednesday would be when you update it. iTunes is an excellent way of distributing things. iTunes will interface with basically all of the podcast hosts. How to do that changed over time, but there are basically step-by-step instructions we don't need to cover. And we use the liberated syndication of libsyn. Okay, that was 22 minutes of didactic. This is what we're going to record to. It's Audacity. It's free. The website is on the handout. And it's like absolutely anything that you do with computers. At first, it's stupid and annoying, and then you figure out how to play with it, and then it becomes very easy, and actually it's quite intuitive. Another nice thing about Audacity is that the people behind it have lots of tutorials that you can access. And the second last point on the handout, mixing a narration with background music, is basically how to make a podcast. Right? They cover a lot of the same stuff, and it's great. So as we are going to be making our podcast, this is the interface we're going to be playing with. We talked about a little bit about music. If you have GarageBand, and if you have a Mac device, you have GarageBand. You might just not have downloaded it, but you should have access. They have something in them called loops. There used to be a bunch of ready-made songs you could just use in GarageBand, and they're gone now. But instead, there's these loops, and these are kind of fun. Like, I just picked funk because, right? So it'll just keep playing that, right? And you think, okay, well, big deal, whatever, right? Well, let's put that there and just sort of stretch it out. And now we need something else. Yeah, that should come in maybe after one bar of that, right? And we can stretch that out, and then we'll probably let's listen to that. And now you need some bass. Anyway, the point being, there's a bunch of what amounts to raw material for songs in here. And you just drag them over here and you squish them or stretch them or move them. And you can make whatever your heart desires. And it's not copyrighted. So to give you an example, sounds pretty good, but there's no one who actually played this. I just put it together in GarageBand. Like, very dramatic. Yeah, so that's one way of using GarageBand. So we're going to be recording in this thing, okay? Again, you can look up all kinds of interesting things about putting voice enhancers in front, like those screens that they have. And those are to reduce plosives, which is the sound of the wind coming and hitting the mic. Just don't worry about that at first. I mean, if you have one, great, you can use it. But if you don't have one, don't worry too much about it. One of the things that you'll want to do, ideally, I'd have some books or something so it's up closer to my face. And you can talk past it so that you're not blowing into it. But again, at first you don't want to stress too much about that. Now my two screens have stopped showing the same thing, so I'm going to have to keep looking up this way. Before you start to record, this is one of the few technical things which I think is useful, is you want to come up here, not up there, to where it says click to start monitor. You see way up here? Click it. So it's listening now, and it's showing you via that bar how loud things are. So if we're just completely quiet for a second, it's hearing the fans. Okay. So we don't want it to hear the fans. Now there's a way to take that out after the fact, but this is where you can start changing the recording level. Oh, where did it go now? You can change the recording level. Actually, no, we won't do it that way. Just over here, there's a little microphone next to the little speaker. So we've made it a little too quiet. So we are going to, there's still a little bit of fan noise. But now let's see, is it a little bit better? We are here at the Banff Center for Cabin Fever 2019. Today I have the pleasure of meeting a group of dedicated rural physicians. They'll be speaking today on what it is that makes rural practice so great. So I'd stopped talking for a while and just let it listen, because we're going to use that in a little while. So this little bit here should just be background noise. That's what we're gonna tell it to listen for and remove in a minute. Okay? So now we need somebody else to come and talk to the microphone.
There are multiple benefits of practicing in a rural community. First is the experience within the community. A rural environment provides a sense of community and a sense of belonging. You're able to build relationships with patients, staff, and colleagues. The second is the type of practice. You have a comprehensive and diverse practice. The continuity of care allows you to be there in the beginning and the end of the life cycle in both individuals or point of care, but also in the broader setting of family and community.
Okay, and one more.
Doing practice in a rural setting is very rewarding. The setting is one thing that is absolutely beautiful. Seeing mountains, seeing rivers, or seeing a beautiful blue sky, it's just absolutely wonderful. The scope of practice is something that one cannot underline too much. You see so much, and you see a broad variety of different illnesses that is rewarding in itself. And then there's the people that you work with, the collegiality that comes from working in a rural setting, the rewards of seeing people coming back to you, thanking you for making a difference in their lives, the community that you work in, you actually are family more than anything. And then lastly, the freedom and the autonomy you experience not being in a legalized setting and being prescribed to what to do.
Well, there we have some interesting perspectives on what makes rural practice so great. It's not just about the scope of practice, it's about the communities, it's about the physical landscapes, and it's about the opportunities that you have. I should think of something more, so I'm going to put in my 3 claps. Now I can't think of anything else, but this is going to be used for our demonstration. I just wanted to show the 3 claps. The 3 claps is, I think it's something that video people do a lot, like YouTubers, as a way of coordinating their audio and their video if they're recording on 2 different devices. So they'll clap 3 times, and then they will have on their audio these 3 really loud spikes, and they just line it up in their video editing so that they line up. Okay, but for our purposes, you're reading along and it's a really good take and you're happy with it, and then you trip over some words, and then so what I do is just stop and then I clap 3 times, and then I go back to somewhere like just the beginning of that paragraph again and start again, because this is going to be not so bad in terms of what we're about to edit it now, right? But if you have a half-hour podcast, that's a lot of squiggly lines to try to figure out, well, where did I do that? So that was step 1. We have ourselves some audio. What I'll do now is just demo a little bit of the very basic stuff that you can do with Audacity. And again, because the screen here no longer shows the same as up there. All right. So if we go all the way to the beginning and play it.
We are here at the Band Center for Cabin Fever 2019. Today I have the pleasure of meeting a group of dedicated rural physicians. They'll be speaking today on what it is that makes rural practice so great.
And then contrast that with,
My name is Ashley Romans. I'm a family.
this is a little quieter because you're farther away
There are
from
multiple
the,
benefits of practicing in the rural community
from the
versus
mic.
experience within the community.
But yours was a pretty clean take, right?
Belonging. You're able to build relationships with patients.
Over here.
My name is Benedict. I'm a
So again, a little bit farther. So we're going to need to even it out a bit if we can. So now's a good time to show a couple of the very simple editing steps. So we can select that and just make it vanish. There are tools up here. There's 6 tools. And if you hover over top of them, they'll tell you what they are. We're at this selection tool right now. Okay? And it's just like, in your Word document when you're selecting text. So we can select that, and we can just vanish it by, there's a button here that says silence, right? It's gone. Or let's say I didn't do that, but I wanted to not only remove that, but also just put things back together. If you hit delete, it'll do that. If at any moment you're like, oh no, that's not what I want to delete, it has a really nice undo function. You can just keep going back. You can go back multiple steps. It's keeping track of all the things that you've done. Okay. It's like, wait, we needed that table bump. Undo, delete. Oh no, wait, it's still silence. Undo silence. Okay, good, we got it back. All right. Now what we want to do is we want to try to bring all of this audio into the same level if we can. And there's something, I should have it on your handout, Equalizer. It's not Equalizer, compressor. It tries to even out your highs and your lows. So as a good first step, if you go to Effect, first, I have multiple things open here, but this is just to save time because I want to show how to put music and stuff in. You would usually just have one track there. And if you click on the box on the farthest left, it selects the entire track. So now we go to Effect, and we go to Compressor. There are some default settings. You can also look up if you want to get fancier. But we just say OK. Now we have made that bit, we made it all a little louder, but brought this into more in line with that. Okay. There are other things we can do to even that out, but just for the sake of time, this is kind of evened out now. But it evens out your highs and lows, and it's good for when you have multiple voices, multiple recordings, or even yourself, like if you're going to sway a bit back and forth, or you're not a professional voice person, so you're not always speaking in the same tone. So that's what the compressor does. And now we have all this noise that's sort of hissing away in the background. You can see it up on that monitor. And we can't really hear it. But something I've discovered is no matter, if it's coming up on that monitor there, somebody's speakers are going to be playing it. So I can listen to a podcast, say, on my computer's speakers, and it sounds fine. But I listen to it in my car, and it just sounds like a bunch of hiss. Or I listen to it on with headphones, and it sounds completely different. Okay? You will never, as far as I can tell, be able to totally even all that out because the speakers are different. But I think a big impediment to people listening to your podcast is annoying sounds. Like I will not listen to something where there's just the hiss going on the whole time. Right? So we want to get rid of this noise, and we've left the mic running in between our takes. So we are sampling background noise continuously. So again, we're using our select tool from our little tool, go away, from our toolbox up here. And we just taken a spot and we're saying, well, this is what noise sounds like. This is a two-step process. And I don't know why they did it 2 steps. Go to Effect, Noise Reduction, Get Noise Profile. That's step 1. All right, it's got the noise profile. Now, right now, remember, I just have this selected. Click on the big box on the left. Okay, it's all selected now. Effect, Noise Reduction. Let's go to step 2 now. And I have not moved these ever. I don't know what they do. You just say, okay. Look how flat that line is here. Okay, so it's gone now. It should mostly be gone. Let's play that. See, there's a little the tiniest bit. And you can run the noise reducer one more time, and it can keep on tramping down on that.
My name is Ashley Romans. I'm a family physician in Pincher Creek.
So now, what we want to do is we can apply Equalizer. This is the thing on the opposite side of that handout. This is basically a way of enhancing certain parts of your voice and removing certain other parts of your voice. There are actually a lot of interesting YouTube videos on this, so we're not going to get into the nitty and gritty, but you can basically make something that sounds good for your voice in the room that you record. So this is something called Podcast 2, which works well for the room in which I record, and now it's sort of applied that. And it'll be hard to hear the difference on these speakers, but
We are here at the Banff Center for Cabin Fever 2019.
basically it brought up the lower
Today I have the
parts
pleasure of meeting
my
a group
voice,
of
and
dedicated
it
rural
dropped out some of
physicians.
the
They'll
echoey
be
sound.
speaking today on what it is that makes rural practice so great.
But the last thing on this little thing is the normalize, which is it'll adjust the audio to a selected loudest point. It will say, we'll set the loudest part to 1. Where normalize. And as a last step, I find that sometimes that'll just make it all vanish and it doesn't seem to work so good. But when you have a recording that has, despite all the stuff you've done to it, still has some very high, some very loud points, and there's distortion, when you normalize it, it'll squish it. Okay. But I don't want to do that, so luckily, bang, it's gone. Okay. So that's how you select things. That's how you can mute things. Now, how about moving things? I want to talk. This is going to be me talking in the intro. And I have this intro music that I want to put in there. So I need to have some space here. I need to move Ashley along so that you come in after all that. So again, there's a couple ways to do it. One way of doing it is by splitting. Which is option I on Macs, but you can just go down to edit and split. So there's a line there now, you can't quite see it. And if you grab this move tool, now it'll move around. If I wanted to put them back together, I just sort of put them here. and I go to that same menu and click boundaries and I say join. Now when I use, this is my move tool, the whole thing moves together. So that's very useful for when you're bringing in your music.
We are here at the Band Center.
So now the music's too loud, right? And this gets us into our next thing, which is the envelope tool right here. Envelope tool. So now suddenly there's these blue lines that show up above and below. And when you click, little balls appear. And those are basically places where you can drag this to make it quieter or louder. And then we could drag the next voice track so that it's not overlapping, or if we want to sort of make it feel like one thing is joining to the next, we can go back to our envelope tool. And right around here is where the voice begins, so around here, we want this to sort of go away. And you can play with that all you like in terms of. So now we have something like this.
We are here at the Band Center for Cabin Fever 2019. Today I have the pleasure of meeting a group of dedicated rural physicians. They'll be speaking today on what it is that makes rural practice so great.
Gonna start getting quieter. This is just from those GarageBand loops too. Like nobody actually played this, but it's just a computer generated thing.
My name is Ashley Romans. I'm a family physician in Pincher Creek. There are multiple benefits of practicing in a rural community.
That
First is the experience within
sort of blends one thing into the
rural
next, right?
environment provides a sense of community and a sense of belonging. You're able to build relationships with patients, staff, and colleagues. The second.
As you finish that up, I stopped the recording. I made a little click there, and we know how to get rid of those. Select it, and we banish it. So between speakers, you can have transitions. So this again, you don't have to do this, but do you want the cowbell transition? Or do you want the, I have a, where did she go? There it is. I have a pizzicato. What do we like for a transition? Cowbell. Cowbell? More cowbell?
Suddenly split.
So we can bring this in. We don't want it, again, to overlap too much. We have now, this whole thing is one big chunk. Go away. We need to split it again. So we can just split it right there. And then use our moving tool to move it off. And again, we would adjust the envelope there, right? We're in our last 10 minutes, but so I guess what I'm trying to show you is you get the idea here, right? You use your selecting tool, you use your envelope tool, you use your moving tool. This thing here lets you put in like markup little things, which is not necessarily essential. This multi-tool somehow does more than one thing, and I haven't figured out how. Okay. I'm making things get bigger and smaller just by pinch zooming. Different. If you use a mouse, I think the roller ball will do that. You can also shrink these things down or grow them out. And now let's say that we were pretty happy with all of this, and we were ready to export it as a single file. So again, for the sake of time, we'll just truncate that. We'll imagine we've done that. So we go to mix, and we say mix and render. But we need to tell it what we're mixing and rendering. So just select everything. So you can say select all, and then mix and render. So now it's one thing. And now again, you can apply your little sound engineering stuff to this if you like. You can spend all day and all night making it perfect, right? But using the compressor got all of us into sort of the same ballpark in terms of our voice levels. We can do better, by all being at the same distance and watching that monitor, right? But that was the compressor. We used the EQ to sort of give a little bit of change to the quality of our voice, and that you can make all kinds of different ones and see what sounds, right? And then we did a noise reduction to get rid of the hiss by intentionally recording a bunch of silence for what we want to be silence, and telling it that this should go away, and then running it through. Does that all make sense? Any questions about that part? Okay. Yes. So the way that it works is that you need to set yourself up with a host. So you can check out any of these that are on the handout, and they'll walk you through it. But basically, they are the one that is holding onto your file, and they are the one that will distribute it to Spotify, or there's all these other services as well, right? But iTunes is different, and iTunes has its own way of sort of running you through the process. You basically have to request it, and iTunes will check it out, and then it'll all go down that way. And if you just Google, how do I get my podcast on iTunes, it'll set that up. In fact, I think even the websites will tell you that, okay, this is how you get it on these other services. For iTunes, click here, and we'll take you through it. It used to be, I reviewed it again, recently. It's not hard, it's just maybe mildly convoluted. They'll usually also want you to have some sort of, we didn't get into it, but some sort of artwork, some sort of a square graphic. That'll be what is displayed, if you need a logo. So if you have really talented people in your neck of the woods who might be interested in making something for you, that's cool. I just made one with clip art.
Does YouTube do podcasts, or do they just do vidcast?
Well, YouTube has, the vidcast. I have encountered things that are audio only. And also, the YouTube is now, if you purchase their premium or whatever, there's a way of having it run in the background playing its audio when you turn the screen off. Because a lot of people do just listen to their YouTube content. But, I don't pay for that. So if I turn off my screen, YouTube turns off. Whereas in my podcast app, if I turn off my screen, the podcast can be playing. It's like music. So apparently YouTube has something like that, but you gotta pay. Was that useful?
Very useful.
All right. Well, thanks for coming. And then if there are suggestions you have, just I imagine there's some.
Thinking that everyone had just